we're going to learn about 1, 2, 3, 4 phrase periods. That was Jackson 5 with their ABC. Hopefully it'll be as simple as that song. So we've talked about 2 phrase periods. Most periods have 2 phrases in them, but they can have more phrases in them as long as the cadences are progressing from relatively weak to relatively strong, and then the final phrase should have the most conclusive cadence of all. Now, if you have 3 phrases in your period, a 3-phrase period is usually going to have 2 questions and an answer, 2 antecedents and a consequent, rather than one question with 2 answers, right? Although that does happen. So here's an example. We have 2 half cadences that are answered by a phrase that ends with a pack. Okay, so here's an example from Rossini's Overture to the Barber of Seville. Listen to it and try to identify where the cadences are and how these phrases are related to each other and what kind of period they create. Here we go. Okay, so it sounds like there's 3 phrases here, each 4 measures long, and the first phrase and the second phrase are related, right? An A and then an A prime. But this one's different. The last phrase is different. So AAB, 3-phrase period with 2 antecedents and 1 consequent. And here's the specific types of cadences that we have. We're in the key of G, and the first cadence is on a 5 chord, so a half cadence. The second one does go 5-1, but the soprano ends on Mi. And then the last cadence is a very strong 5-1 with the soprano on Do. So that's the strongest of all 3, bringing that 3-phrase period to an end. Even more common than 3-phrase periods are 4-phrase periods. And in this case, the strongest cadence comes only in the 4th phrase, the final phrase. Often you'll see that a 4-phrase period is organized into pairs of 2 phrases each. And we can often call this a double period. So here's a diagram that shows what a double period looks like. Notice that the first 2 phrases are grouped together as the antecedent, and the second pair of phrases are grouped together as the consequent. And we compare the cadences of each of those 2 groups of phrases. So it's like it's like a period times 2. It's double period. When we're trying to determine if a double period is parallel or contrasting, we're going to compare the beginnings of each of those groups, so the first and the third phrase. So in this first case, we have an A, and here the second half of the double period also starts with an A, so that would make it a parallel double period. First and third phrases begin similarly. Whereas here, the first phrase starts A, third phrase starts with a contrasting idea B. So the 2 halves begin differently, so this is a contrasting double period. Okay? Here's a very good example of a double period from a Beethoven piano sonata, which I'll play for you. Notice that it has 4 phrases, and each of these is 4 measures long, and the cadences are marked, so you can see that the strongest cadence, the only pack, comes at the very end. Alright, so I'll play this and try to determine the relationship between these phrases in this double period. Okay, so did you notice that the first phrase and the third phrase begin very similarly? In the first phrase we have eighth notes, and in the third one we have 16th notes. But other than that, it's the same musical idea. So those are both A phrases, and the second phrase and the fourth phrase also begin similarly, so those are both B phrases. So since the two halves begin similarly, the same, almost, then this would be a parallel double period. And so the overall form is A, B, and then A prime, B prime, and it's a parallel double period with 3 half cadences in 1 pack. Okay, this last slide is just giving you a few of the other things you might run into as you deal with phrase form terminology. If you find a set of phrases that seem to belong together, but they don't form one of these typical phrase relationships that we've seen, for example, if the final cadence doesn't seem conclusive, you can group them together and call it a phrase group. You'll most often find these in transitional passages, where there's just a series of phrases that don't create a period, but they seem to belong together. When a phrase is repeated identically and the cadences are the same, like you have a pack and then another pack, we'll just call it a repeated phrase. It's not creating a period because the first phrase is not dependent on the second to resolve its cadence. So repeated phrase. And the last term is, if you do happen to find a single phrase that doesn't connect with any others, it's just standing alone, that's called an independent phrase. It's actually not that common, but you may find that. So those are all the terms for phrase form, and you can go ahead and take the quiz that follows.